Howdy, brothers and sisters. This is Pike, Point, Alaska, coming to you from my log cabin on the banks of the Anchor River. If you want to support my small channel, small farm, the link is www.paypal.me/Pike A. You'll see I'm in Anchor Point, Alaska. First article that I'm going to read is called Veniaminich by Alexei Grigorenko. In a village forgotten by God near Rostov the Great, the former grandeur of which was frozen only in the white stone Kremlin of Metropolitan Jonah, and in the proud prefix to the name of the city, my friend and I bought a hut each for insignificant trifles. It was in the mid 1980s, marked by great political and economic experiments. The turning of northern rivers to irrigate cotton fields in Central Asia, the food program for the benefit and satiation of the hungry population of the USSR, and the destruction of unpromising villages in areas of the country that had no prospects for the development of agriculture. Howdy, thanks for joining me. To put it simply, the destruction of the non-Black Earth region with all the ensuing circumstances. Due to the total desolation and depopulation of our village, most of the houses simply disappeared. They fell apart and rotted or died in the fire. From 600 inhabitants, according to the confessional lists of the last calm year of the 20th century, 1913, 6 people remained. This is how the true goals and the objectives of the October Revolution of 1917 were read. Decay and devastation also touched our 300-ruble 5-wall house. The cattle yard attached to the hut in the northern way fell the first victim of the inexorable time. First, the roof collapsed, and then collapsed the corners, rotted, flooded with rains. When I bought the 5-walled house, only rickety log walls remained of the yard. In the center of the yard, there was a huge pile of black wood, broken rafters, wooden scales of the roof, some rotten boards, and other rubbish. In the spring, my wife found in this heap of black decay an icon of the 12 great feasts. Once upon a time, here on the Gumenetsky Hill, there was an elegant church of the Intercession of the Mother of God, which in the first years of the 19th century was built by the ancestors of our villagers. Their names are known from the confessional paintings of those times, and one can only imagine how they rejoiced at these new walls of the church under construction, of incredible grace and beauty, not at all provided for by the diocesan standard architectural projects, which the remarkable priest Alexander Ivanov Rozov, the brightest representative of the centuries-old priestly Yaroslavl dynasty, dared to do. From generation to generation, our peasants received holy baptism under these arches, rejoiced on the bright 12 great feasts, and grieved with fasts. And at the end of the allotted period of life, under these high heavens and on these free fields and meadows, bordered by forests and centuries-old forests, they lay in open coffins, taking in cold hands the prayers of absolution and the last kiss from their relatives, who remain for the time being to live and work in this blessed land. But all this measured order of life and death had to end at the behest of the Kremlin dreamers, who arrived in a sealed wagon from well-fed neutral Zurich. Through the conflagrations and devastation of the Great War to fight for the happiness of the working people. In the 50s of the 20th century, this church was blown up in concern that someone would not be knocked down by a dilapidated church wall. The enterprising descendants of the builders of the temple chose large-sized bricks from the walls for household needs and eventually chose to dangerous emergency values. And earlier in 1941, just before the war, the iconoclast of wondrous beauty was removed from here and placed in the Rostov Museum. We can say that they were miraculously saved. After all, after the closure, the church stood unattended for almost a decade, although formerly the community was listed on paper until 1940. In the 70s, when the restorers finally got their hands on the professional cleaning of the Gumenets iconostasis, art historians were amazed to find out that it was painted by the workshop of the famous icon painter Dionysius, and there are still disputes about how this pearl ended up in their wilderness among forests and fields. The names of the clerk Danila Mamriev, the Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, Tsar Ivan III, from whose patrimony the village of Ponakarov, the iconostasis, was moved to Gumenets in 1823, and Archbishop Tikhon Golanin, a participant of the Great Holy Council, an associate of St. Joseph of Volotsk, and Archbishop of Gennady of Novgorod, and the struggle against the heresy of the Judaizers are commemorated here. The princely family of the Golinins and the time of the ancient appanage of Rostov Principality belonged to Gumenets with the entire vast district. But at the time of our appearance here, all these mystical and historical connections were hidden from us. The purchased five-wall house required some kind of repair. The lower rows of the log house rotted. The roof leaked. The winter half-blind frames, inserted back in the 60s, were tightly clamped by the natural subsidence of the perimeter of the house. Subsidence, rather, of the perimeter of the house. The doors did not close. The steps of the porch fell through. One of the locals advised to invite the carpenter, Veniaminich from Rostov, with his permanent partner. At the same time, in the spring of '88, they appeared in our facade, short, squat Rostov peasants, alcoholized and smoky to black, burned by the merciless sun of the Nero on poaching fishing, tempered by wine drinking and ditches and ramparts of the Rostov earthen fortress, overgrown with nettles and quinoa, planted by the visiting architect Jan Cornelius van Rodenburg, who was a resident of the Dutch land in the city of Amsterdam, a city master by order of Tsar Mikhail Fyodorovich in 1631, crooked-legged in old trousers and a torn pea jacket. The Rostov craftsmen put their boxes with carpenter's tools on the ground, inspected the hut, and made their verdict. Everything can be corrected, beaten up and slowed down the half-life. Veniaminich lived on Bebel Street in Rostov, although we never found out who Bebel was and what this Bebel had to do with the 1,000-year-old city of Rostov. He built houses and sheds, caught huge egg pike on ice fishing on the lake, right opposite the Spaso Yakorolevsky Monastery. In the summer, on a flimsy boat near Porichye, he blocked the Vorskaya Kopkanka with kilometer-long nets woven with his own hands. And he cursed with obscene words the huge lake carps, which not only have never been caught in the catch, but also with the bony fin, towering above the broad gray back, cut like a knife, Benjamin's precious property, and went into their native muddy Separel to gain strength and weight. Veniaminich also hunted beavers on the Kostia with the help of wire trap loops. The beaver is a valuable animal, Veniaminich laughed, coughing in the womb and smoking almost a goat's leg cigarette. We sell glands and skins on the road near Pesochny or Lvov, and we roast and consume the meat, an excellent snack. Haven't you tried it? But in vain. Beaver, we were surprised on Srentenka, where we lived. There was a variety of meats in the Oktonik store: moose, bear meat, wild boar, and hare, all for everyone. But we heard about beaver meat for the first time. Here it must be said that with the general scarcity of the Soviet store assortment, Rostov fed almost to the fullest the surroundings of the once ancient Rostov appendage principality. Mushroom forests, a variety of valuable berries, cranberries, raspberries, blueberries, lingonberries, forest and lake game, the fish, Nero flowing into Lake Sara and the Veksa flowing out of it, the nearby Ustye River, which merged with the Veska at the old mill behind the Nikolo Perevoz made of boulders of the Ice Age, And here, having pampered and made noise on the granite rapids, both rivers were already called Korotslaya, which flowed into the Volga near Yaroslavl. Such was the former glorious merchant route from the Varangians to the Greeks, Nero, Vex, Kotorosol, Volga, and the Caspian Sea, which enriched many cities and villages that were lucky enough to stay on the banks of these rivers. But the glory of the merchants, as well as this glorious path, belonged to history. Vienna Minich stayed in our village. After finishing the work with us, he moved to my friend, with whom he bought houses. He even managed to buy 2 houses, one for living, the second as a consumable for the repair of the first. So Vienna Minich and his partner began to dismantle the back wall of the doomed hut, picking out from there the logs still suitable for use and dragging them on the hump to the hut being repaired for life. They also removed the floors. This lay in a heap until the time of fulfillment of the prophecy, so to speak, because practically nothing was used, with a few exceptions. Here the word of the gospel was embodied, that one does not put new patches on old clothes, or about the new wine which requires new skins and not old ones. Well, while Vienna Minich was doing his thankless and moderately meaningless work, we had an incredible number of moles, which not only undermined the beds with various garden goods, but dug under the roots of fruit trees by midsummer. Part of our new garden had safely dried up. Vienna Minich showed a rare talent for daring these underground pests, which were similar in size to rats from our plots. He invented some cunning loops which he set into the holes, and not so much time passed as when another victim fell into these loops. Sometimes Vienna Minich caught 5 to 7 moles a day. He carefully killed them, skinned, butchered them, skinned them with stocking, and crucifying it with sharp splinters, dried it in the sun and in the wind. My wife was very frightened by this still life. The skins of bulls vividly remind her of old of dried bats. Vienna Minich only laughed at her. I'll get the right amount, he wheezed in a grin, coughed up phlegm from the depths of his frail body, and sew a hat for myself and you'll envy me. But he was also sad. No matter how many voles were caught in his loops, their number did not decrease at all. And every morning we found new crooked furrows over the shallow underground passages during the night. You know what the secret is? Vienna Minich wheezed mysteriously. We must catch the king who rules over the moles, catch him and kill him. Then his whole kingdom will collapse as if it had never been, and these subjects will leave these places forever. Without a czar, without a king, or without a general secretary like our Gorbachev, their house will be empty, amen. No way, we didn't believe it. Vienna Minich insisted that he was right. Amen, I say to you. But then I thought about something that I did not quite understand in this hoarse vocabulary of our carpenter, and soon realized that a light, almost imperceptible shadow in his speech was a hint of Church Slavonic. This completely unexpected amen finished it off. I approached the master with care. Vienna Minich, come from, where did you get all this as, these, and other completely atypical words for you? You didn't go to parochial school. I didn't study, Vienna Minich grinned solemnly, but I know. Where do you come from, Vienna Minich? And my late father was a deacon in the Leontiev church. That's where it all came from. Well, all these words and expressions stuck in my memory. Well, there was no stopping me either, and until Vienna Minich had told me everything without concealment, I did not lag behind him. Well, before that, there was a certain verbal debate between us about God, about faith, and about the church, which, as we know, the gates of hell will not prevail. A few decades later, I was reading consistorial documents and acts of the past time in the Yaroslavl archives, and suddenly the rector of the Leontiev church, completely forgotten by that time, about whom Vienna Minich once told us in the Village Freedom, arose in the abyss of decayed papers and newspaper articles. In 1923, at a Congress of Church Renovationists, priest Zarin appealed to the delegates with a proposal to collectively join the Communist Party. The repainted priests adopted a resolution in which they called capitalism a mortal sin and proclaimed the struggle against it sacred for a Christian. But still, it was felt from this note that the Soviet government was very wary of these progressive priests, unequivocally calling them overpainted. The alliance with the authorities, in the eyes of the authorities themselves, was quite temporary and everything. The communists wanted to crush the reptile at all costs, and in this sense, any alliance could be useful until the time of the deed. But the renovationists reasoned differently. The false Metropolitan Vebdensky and a large company of such czarins sincerely believed that the former thousand-year-old church had been abolished forever by the current decree, and that they had replaced the obsolete old forms. But what did they do, imagining themselves to be completely new wine instead of the old and sour wine which had become a poison for Soviet society, in their opinion? This can be judged from another already late article in the Leningrad newspaper. Secret 10-day summary of the most important drafts of the preliminary censorship from August 10th to 20th, 1936. The factory newspaper Leningrad Kommunar, number 22, and the article Religion is a Class Tool in the Hands of the Enemies of the Working People is crossed out. More intelligent churchmen, on the contrary, began to repaint. During the service, they began to pronounce many years of the Soviet regime. Portraits of Marx, Lenin, Stalin, and Kalinin appeared in the churches next to the saints, and some priests even made crosses with the image of a hammer and sickle, with the inscription, "Proletarians of all countries, unite." Vienna Minich, whom I had said, told me that when the Bolsheviks began to destroy the churches in Rostov, just so that they would not exist, and in order to correct the age-old untruths of oppression and enslavement of the unfortunate slave people, then Vienna Minich's father solemnly resigned from his rank. He wrote to the locum tenens of the patriarchal throne, Metropolitan Sergius, that he said so. I, Viennaman Troitsky, no longer want to serve what does not exist. I even want to change my family nickname, imposed by force on my ancestor by Archbishop Paul in 1801, when he was a mere boy studying at the Yaroslavl Theological School. But I want to become, for example, Comrade Trotsky in memory and honor of a revolutionary leader, Lev Davidovich, without whom there would have been no victory of the socialist revolution, and the Reds would have not defeated the Whites in the Civil War. Remove the unfortunate letter I from the last name. It's not difficult. Proletarians of all countries, unite, my father solemnly concluded his speech, and added, let them give me a leather jacket in the warehouse on Proletarskaya Street, for I want to be like the vanguard of the Bolshevik party from the back. Vienna Minich told us, well, Sergius removed his rank as he wanted, but he could not remove the initial I. Vienna Minich went on. He had no such authority. Dad went to the registry office here on the Podozerka in Rostov, and there were bureaucrats that said that the ministers like him, even former ones, were not supposed to desecrate the holy names of the leaders of the revolution, and refused the legitimate request. So we forever remained Troitsky and not Trotsky. Yes, Peeper, it turned out better after all. Stalin fought later. Call it a pot. Vienna Minich grinned at the black stumps in place of his teeth. But don't put it in the stove. And then the time struck for the Leontiev Church. The local authorities decided to cleanse Rostov of traces of past illusions, to demolish all the Rostov churches, along with the Assumption Cathedral, to demolish even the churches in the Kremlin, leaving only white stone walls from labors of Jonah Sisioevich, and use the vacated space inside the walls as a concentration camp for the enemies of the working people. Following the example of the glorious Solovetsky Monastery, and the Bolsheviks began their work with the destruction of the Church of Leonti. Well, what else? The imperturbable carpenter stated, Leontius was the first saint in Rostov. He baptized our ancestors in Nero during the reign of Tsar Piz, and it was with him that we should have begun to fight against errors, logic. Here I should stop and think about what brought us to Rostov, what guided us, and what the providence and the fact that we, who had nothing to do with these places and had never been here before, found ourselves on the swampy shores of an endless lake sea in view of the ancient Russian decaying city, the foundation and beginning of which was lost in the darkness of the first millennium, and the whole new era. After all, we just came here to buy cheap houses so that we could have somewhere to take small children for the summer, to breathe fresh air, drink fresh milk from a cow or a goat, graze on our beds with salads and parsley, nibble apples, pears, and plums, and no one could have imagined that in a good 2 decades my wife and I would sit in the local archives, bit by bit obtaining information about the people who lived here 200 and 300 years ago and to whom we had nothing to do, reconstructing the history of the destruction of the former church on Gumenets in the time of troubles. Then the construction of a new one, which stood on the Gumenets hill for a century and a half, also perished, and from which the magnificent Ponikarovsky or Gumenetsky miraculously survived. Iconostasis, and how many new people met during this time, many of whom became our kind-hearted friends. How many discoveries, historical, aesthetic, and human, awaited us. But the future was hidden from us until the deadline, and we just came here to buy houses on the cheap, not knowing that we were buying fate. And the deacon's son, the smoky carpenter, Vienna Menich, turned out to be something like the mythical Charon with a coin in his black teeth, who ferried us through the symbolic stream that separates the present life with its various cares and burdens from the life of the past, cleansed as if by fire from past filths, troubles, untruths. After all, everything is long past, and the victims of violence and untruth rest next to their executioners. And no one has escaped the Lord's judgment, and in the illusory kingdom of the past there stand, untouched and undesecrated, 1,000-year-old cathedrals in which dozens of generations prayed for their needs and for the salvation of souls who had passed their life long before you. The bells of the city of Kitaza and not heard from the bottom of Lake Nero, from the bottom of Lake Svetloyar, from the bottom of the Russian Sea of Lake Baikal. But they still sound invitingly and at the same time secretly. You just need to listen and hear. Everything is long past, but at the same time is still alive. And now you see the great builder of Rostov's land, St. Jonah, an associate with contemporary of equally great church builder, Patriarch Nikon, and the remarkable compiler of the biographies of the saints, Archbishop Dmitri, and the host of venerable fools and monks of the truly last times of the old Russian feats. About one can read completely implausible descriptions of eyewitnesses, and which cannot be applied even in approximate realization to a contemporary person, priest, or monk. Such, for example, were Isidore and Abraham of Rostov, John Vlasity, who came from the German country, Saint Irenarich the recluse, who amazed even the cynical Polish soldier Sir Jan Peter Sapia and his feat, who led the despoilers of Rostov and Pereslavo in the time of troubles. The venerable recluse later strengthened the Russian warriors Minin and Pozharsky, who were going to liberate Moscow from the Poles, and their shaken determination. Did we know that we involuntarily change our fate, turn it where it needs to be? After all, we just came here to buy crumbling old huts in a village destined for destruction, and that's it. Spend the summer months, contemplate wondrous sunsets, drink milk, and it turned out to be a life. And when the Rostov Executive Committee adopted a resolution to overcome the pernicious church cult in a particular city and district, priest Zarin, having collected the belongings and valuables that remained after the first Bolshevik pogrom in the early 1920s, nevertheless withdrew from the resolute and uncompromising struggle against obscurantism in his church, leaving Deacon Vienneman to be active for himself, and left, according to rumors, to Moscow to help in every further renewal of the church life, the existing false metropolitan, as he was called by the Tikhonites, Catacombniks, and Sergianists. Alexander Vedensky, Our frantic Deacon Benjamin not only shook his beard at every corner of the streets and squares that had already been renamed by that time, tore his vest and thundered on a completely Nietzschean theme that God had died and that the new leaders of the revolution should be believed in his place. But he also set a living example for the wavering people with a crowbar at the ready. He climbed the bell tower of Leontius and began to tear off the iron hinges from the mighty beam on which hung the head bell of many pounds. The evangelist, cast under the same metropolitan John by the God-fearing and pious merchants of Rostov. The Rostov people, already thinned out by the Civil War, typhus, the Spanish flu, and executions for imaginary and real guilt and the local emergency, still stood in a considerable crowd near the church, crossed themselves and cried, while the church itself was cordoned off by a great chain of Red Army soldiers from the military unit, which has survived to this day on the shore of the lake. In the backyard of the Church of the Intercession, some women were shouting, feeling sorry for the dying church, and no wonder. They themselves were born and lived their lives there, in such a familiar environment of ancient white stone walls, the sparkle of domes, and the harmonious voices and sounds of the znameni and everyday chants, which were heard from the open forged gates of all Rostov churches, the polyphonic and harmonious roar of bells, over which reigned... Oh, shoot. I'm sorry, I just lost my spot. Some women were shouting, feeling sorry for the dying church, and no wonder. They themselves were born and lived their whole lives there. In such a familiar environment of ancient white stone walls, the sparkle of domes, and the harmonious voices of the sounds of the znameni and everyday chants, which were heard from the open forged gates of all Rostov churches, the polyphonic and harmonious roar of bells, over which reigned the deep, heroic breath of the main Kremlin bell, the famous 2,000-pound Sostyov cast memory of Metropolitan Jonah's father back in 1688. And not only them, but the innumerable chains of Rostov families went into the darkness of past centuries. And they were born and lived and died in their time in the glorious, wonderful city on the shores of the Lake Sea, rested forever in this ancient, sacred land of their homeland. How was it possible not to feel sorry and to not cry for the church? After all, it turns out that they had to live to the end of their time, or still no. And ahead of those who remained here to live out their lives awaited even more terrible trials. New bloody wars moving down peoples, famines, reprisals, collective farm slavery, and the creation of the Tower of Babel of the bright future, and then the clumsy reforms of the Petrocrats who changed their colors in time, and the chubby-cheeked Harvard boys. What was the problem with the Church of Leontius and Zavorye? There was no problem at all. It just at the time had come for him to move, to give way to a new way of life and a new Soviet man. The time has come to die. But Deacon Benjamin, climbing the bell tower with a crowbar at the ready, only laughed at the darkness and stubbornness of those who mourned the desecration and imminent death of the church, and also shouted in a funny voice and a bad voice from the middle steps of the bell tower, "Don't strain and don't twist, Orthodox Christians. All this is no longer important and does not matter at all. There's only communism ahead and everything will be free. If you want flour or sugar, take as much as you want in the storehouse. Just make sure that your muzzle does not crack and that you don't have to pay at all." Well, this is, for example, the same is true of the manufactory with buckets and tinned goods. How come, one of the doubters shouted, "The torment of your communism, Father Benjamin, will not appear by itself, you know yourself, especially sugar. What kind of trick is this?" Well, how could the deacon not say what had been distinctly reading about for decades? at the divine service here in this church, which was now assertively and inexorably trying to destroy and break. All things are possible to him who believes and hopes. This is how the essence of the mark of the evangelist is written. Don't you remember? Damn you, Benjamin, someone from the crowd gave voice. Damn your flour, your sugar, your buckets, and your communism. Get down, bastard, get out. Do not occupy the bell towers. The deacon did not see further and did not know whether the policemen had taken the screamer under their white hands for the anti-Soviet propaganda and agitation, or had let loose unreasonable curses on the brakes and shouted only in his heart. Our children will live under communism, fools, and he let go further down the stairs to a bunch of merchant belles of various faces, dragging his crowbar up to the steps. Vienna Minich laughed hoarsely, climbed into the antediluvian pouch, for the Samosad. We who listened to his story did not ask him anything. Rolling up the goat's leg, Vienna Minich said, well, the dead father was a little mistaken. Here I am, his half-child, and soon I will be getting ready for the road. To my deceased wife and friends, the Korofans, and I've not seen any communism at all. Go take a bag of flour, a bag of sugar for free in the same storage on Proletariskaya Street. They will immediately beat you off your paws and confine you to prison for several years. Vienna Minich remembered as a boy, standing under the temple of Leonti, how muffled the crowbar was knocking on the brick steps, which his progressive father dragged behind him, and probably these were the last minutes of his happy and quite blessed childhood. After that, everything turned out completely different. But was there only one deacon who speculatively came to the conclusion that God was dead? Not alone in how many of them there was and is known only to God. I read a similar story by Sergei Fudel. In the 1920s, the liturgy ended in a church near Moscow. Everything went on as usual, and the priest made the final blessing. After that, he went outside to the people on the ambo and began to unmask himself. In the heavy silence that followed, he said, I have been deceiving you for 20 years, and now I am taking off these clothes. There was a shout, a noise, a cry in the crowd. People were shocked and offended. Why did he serve at least today? It is not known how it could have ended if a young man had not suddenly ascended the ambo and said, why are you worried and weeping? And after all, this has always been the case. Remember that Judas sat at the Last Supper, and these words, which reminded us of the existence of a dark double of the church in history, somehow calmed many people down or explained something. And being present at the supper, Judas did not violate the sacrament. Except this apostate from the Moscow region simply went nowhere and did not climb to destroy his church with a crowbar. Our deacon climbed in. But did the unbelief and zeal of our deacon grow out of nowhere? He was flesh of flesh, and the Rosnochinitsky of the 19th century, by virtue of his unexpected freedom from the shackles of the estates and restrictions, imbued with illusory ideas about the reorganization of the existing order. They often easily became human material for various kinds of revolutionary groups like the Petroshevites and terrorist organizations like the Black Redistribution and the People's Will. The first troublemakers, Dobrolyubov, Chernyshevsky, who directed and called on Russia to the axe, were the children of priests. However sad it may be to say so, they are innumerable, and this became a kind of new tradition. It is bitter, wild to read about the incredible, often blasphemous riots that swept through all the theological seminaries of Russia in 1905. The impoverishment of the Orthodox spirit was noted by many memorialists of those years. Metropolitan Vienneman, recalling his young years and studies at the Theological Academy, noted that only a few people gathered for morning and evening prayers within the walls of the academy, out of a total number of students for a good 100, and the students of the academy were by no means simpletons. Village priests, but future church administrators, future bishops, future theologians. So what could be expected from the total mass of the clergy, who filled 100,000 or even more churches in pre-revolutionary Russia, which apparently made up the external Holy Russia that we lost, and which in essence essence was the gospel fallen coffin, beautiful on the outside and filled with bones on the inside. What was the point of grieving over the destroyed churches or the abandoned and dying churches and monasteries in the desolate, depopulated villages of the Soviet era? If 1600 years ago John Chrysostom said that church is not walls and a roof but faith and life, and if the faith dried up and the life was defiled, the temple abandoned by man sank into the same place, into devastation and non-existence. The person himself should have been mourned. What happened to the zealous Deacon Benjamin, who climbed his native Leontiev bell tower, can be considered an accident or an unfortunate coincidence, and do not at all shift the responsibility for what happened to God or to his faithful servant Saint Leonti, who defended but still did not protect his church from desecration and destruction. Vienna Minich told me that when his father climbed out to the upper platform with a crowbar and began to tear the hinges off the main bell, the matter turned out to be not so simple as he had been expected and imagined. Over the centuries, the bell hinges grew into the stone ceiling as if they merged with it, and the deacon picked at the stubborn stone with a crowbar for quite a long time, recusing rusty thick metal crutches forged conscientiously by nameless Rostov blacksmiths in the 17th century, picking them up with the flat end of his crowbar, loosening them like a strong wisdom tooth in a human mouth. The deacon could not control the bells for a long time and shouted to the crowd still standing under the church, "Orthodox, bend it up." But no one responded to my father's call, said Vienna Minich. Everyone stood as if rooted in the ground, if stunned. The young women who had been moaning until then even stopped their lamentations, and there were no more curses when Dad touched the bells, and they responded so quietly, so tenderly, as if saying goodbye to the city, to the lake, to us. Then something strange happened to the people. Everyone seemed to resign themselves at once. Everyone understood that shouts and tears would not cope with the Soviet regime, and that nothing could be done and progress could not be stopped. If the authorities of the church in Rostov said to break it, then we will break it. Well, in general, while my father was straining in the bell tower with all his strength, an accident happened. He knocked these crutches out of the eyelets, then something happened at the top, and the head evangelist broke off as Dad wanted and planned. But the bell did not fly down, but got stuck there in a distorted way, on the bell platform sideways. I also thought, well, the man will have to climb there and push the bell. When then my father began to scream heartily, but from below it was impossible to make out what had happened, and there and why he was screaming, and it seemed to be no words, only ah, an inhuman squeal as if a hog was being cut. Well, when the peasants climbed the bell tower after some time, they saw the head evangelist having fallen from the ceiling, on which he had been hanging for 200 years, crushed my father, so much so that his belly split, broke somehow, and his spine broke like a dry branch. One might say, in the edge of the bell, like a plow, cut my father in half. The gray intestines still crawled out of him. The whole playground was covered in blood there. Well, yes, I feel sorry for Dad. What can I say? You would not wish such a death on your enemy. Well, the bell was still being lifted up, and the help of logs to be taken out, my father died. The men threw the evangelist murderer down, followed by other bells. Everyone broke into pieces. Not a single one remained intact. And that was the point. Dad could not be brought back, no matter how much these bells were ringing. And a few months later, that bell tower was broken. Therefore, my father's work was finished. Well, and you, I asked. What about me, Vienna Minich said. You can't resurrect Papa. Priest Zarin came from Moscow, and after that, petitioned for a note about his father to be printed in the Bolshevik way, saying that he gave his life in the struggle. But the censorship did not let me know about my father. He was a clergyman. So then my mother and I lived together, and I did not give any bonus for Dad in the Social Security service. I went to work for Chikor. I was 13 years old then. All right, said Vienna Minich, gathering up his instruments. It's time for me to go back to Rostov. Otherwise, I have said too much to you here, lest your neighbor call me to account. He nodded in the direction of the neighbor's house. Why, Vienna Minich? I was surprised. For anti-Soviet propaganda and agitation, as if you don't know. Vienna Minich grinned slyly, rolling up the wire mole loops. I have my own complaints about them. They could have encouraged him for his father's merits, but they didn't. Listen, Vienna Minich, I said, what kind of strange name did your Zarin have? I did not find such a thing in the Saints. After all, this was the name of a military poison gas during the Great War. So it's not a name, it's a surname, and the emphasis here should be on the A. But what was his name? I forgot. A whole life passed since those years, and so they called him by his surname, Zarin. And they also hit the stress in the wrong place. So do I forgot the name of Vienna Minich. In conclusion, it is necessary to say what happened to the Leontov church later. In the 60s, attempts were made to blow it up completely, probably in revenge for the premature death of a zealous deacon. But the stone from which it was built surpassed, oddly enough, the power of explosives. Apparently, the younger brother of Fyodor Dostoevsky, a diocesan Yaroslavl architect, with assistant masons, worked hard in his time, under whom Leonti was rebuilt and strengthened. Only the south side there was a gigantic breach, 9 meters high and 5 meters wide on the eastern side of the temple, where also holes and destruction. The dome collapsed. The bell tower disappeared long ago, and what remained of the glorious temple stood for many decades without a roof, without windows, open to the bad weather, rains, and winds. At one time, a wooden toilet was erected on the site of the altar. The cemetery was completely destroyed, where for centuries representatives of the glorious merchant families, the Malgins, the Serebrenikovs, the Milyutins, the Klebnikovs, the Yemelyanovs, involved in the real golden age of Rostov, found eternal peace. The communists destroyed 14 churches in ancient Kiztezgrad. Some did not leave a trace at all. Others destroyed the bell tower, like Pokrovsky's, but the church itself remained, or vice versa. On the main market square, there was a tall fire tower, in which a multi-tiered bell tower is easily guessed. Well, the Church of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross itself is destroyed. But the task of destroying all Rostov churches without exception still turned out to be unbearable for the executioners of Stalin's plan. Too many churches were built by merchants in their blessed golden age here, seasoning the work of their hands with love and unparalleled generosity. And there is no need to talk about the architectural masterpiece of Metropolitan Jonah at all. The destruction of 14 temples was apparently a kind of symbol and demonstration of force. What was left was desecrated with zeal. Some were the glorious Rostov monasteries, which were favored by the Tsar of Muscovite Rus and the Russian Empire. Today, little by little, the church ruins are being restored with varying success, and again, new people come from different villages and cities of Russia for these purposes, and they stay in Rostov forever. The church of St. Leontius on Zarovye, a bell tower was built. Monastic life also resumed there in 3 Rostov monasteries. But the story told by Vienna Minich concerns only Rostov, and there is also a Rostov district in the Yaroslavl region. The provincial city of Yaroslavl itself, called the Volga Jerusalem before the revolution, and Russia as a whole. Vienna Minich, with his carpenter's box in due time, slowly left along the road to Lisavi, to Zoglov, to the bus stop. A whole life passed since then, and a lot has happened to all of us. But from the time I dream of Vienna Minich in vague dreams, he grins, winks slyly, and seems to want to tell me something else. And although the warm time has already come to the lands of the former appanage principality of Rostov, the surrounding forests around Lomov and Gumanets are about to be covered with tender new greenery like a light gas canopy. Hard-working bees and bumblebees are about to fly along the eternal paths of our berry fields and meager gardens. Vienna Minich has a gray cap on his head, made of the mole-like general secretary, whom he nevertheless caught 35 years ago under our hut, which burned down in turn 23 years later. Alexei Grigorenko, January 28th, 2025. Hope you like that story. Sorry, I got some sinus stuff going on. Some of the words make me stumble sometimes because I want to pronounce them right. Some of the Russian words and sounds are hard to get out. So thank you so much for joining me. I love you all so much, and God loves you so much more than I can ever express. 8:19. I might be on later with something, I'm not sure. We'll see. So thank you all for joining me. And I'll either see you again tonight or, God willing, tomorrow. God bless you all. Till next time.